2 months is too little. They let him go. They had no sudden healing. To think that Providence would take a child from his mother while she prays is appalling. Who told us we'd be rescued? What has changed and why should we be saved from nightmares? We're asking why this happens to us who have died to live. It's unfair. This is what it means to be held, how it feels when the sacred is torn from life and you survive. This is what it is to be loved and to know that the promise was when everything fell, we'd be held. This hand is bitterness, we want to taste it, let the hatred be numb. Our sorrow, the wise hand opens slowly to lilies of the valley. And tomorrow, this is what it means to be held, how it feels when the sacred is torn from your life and you survive. This is what it is to be loved and to know that the promise was when everything fell, we'd be held. If hope is born of suffering, if this is only the beginning, can we not wait for 1 hour, watching for our Savior? This is what it means to be held, how it feels when the sacred is torn from your life and you survive. This is what it is to be loved and to know that the promise was when everything fell, we'd be
Can there be good grief? Our theme text is found in Psalms 34, 17 and 18. The righteous cry, and the Lord heareth, and delivereth them out of all their troubles. The Lord is nigh unto them that are of a broken heart, and saveth such as be of a contrite spirit.
And, Jonathan, everyone has experienced loss in their life. Some have experienced far more than others and have had to learn to cope. In any event, loss, tragic loss especially, brings grief, and grief brings a sense of facing overwhelming odds. So, the question really is, how do we deal with grief? How do we cope with loss? How do we adjust to perhaps never getting to say goodbye? Are there things we should or should not do? And what about helping our friends or family cope with grief? What should we do, or what should we say? Stay with us this morning, folks, as we look into grief and try to find ways not only to cope, but to make our grief good grief. And Jonathan, we just have a couple of questions. What are they?
The first question is, how does grief work?
Okay, and secondly, can there be good grief? So again, as we begin to unfold this subject, the idea is to discuss and try to figure out, according to a scriptural process, what grief is, and then how to work through it and how to help others to work through it. So Jonathan, let's get started by looking at what the word means, and let's look it up from an online dictionary. What's the definition of grief?
A keen mental suffering or distress over affliction or loss, sharp sorrow, painful regret. And the second definition is a cause or occasion of keen distress or sorrow.
All right, and I think really the key words here are keen mental suffering. It's very, very pronounced. It's very, very pointed. And I think that's the first thing to observe about grief. It's not something that's general. It has got a very specific source, and there are very, very specific reactions that happen as a result. And doing some research for this, one of the things that we found is that there tend to be stages to grief. Now, everybody who goes through the experience of grief doesn't necessarily go through all of the stages in a nice symmetrical fashion, but we found a description of these stages that I think will be helpful. We got it from About.com, and the article, it's not that long, so we're going to go through it, was Understanding the Grieving Process. So, Jonathan, why don't you start with those couple of introductory paragraphs, and then we'll switch off on the phases of grief.
In order to understand what a person is going through when they've experienced the death of a loved one, you must first understand the grieving process. The grieving process differs based on who we are, whom we have lost, and how much our day-to-day life is altered by the death. Although everyone experiences the grieving process differently, the grieving process tends to have 7 distinct phases.
All right, so the first thing is to understand is that while it's the same, it's always different. And I think that's an important place to start in dealing with a subject as sensitive as this. While it's the same, there's always something different about it, and if we have gone through it, we may be able to gain a better understanding of someone else, but it doesn't mean we can really peg exactly what's happening. Perhaps sometimes you can, but other times you can't. So this is one of those things where a lot of listening and a lot of observing, I think, are some of the answers, especially in helping somebody else out. So the grieving process, phase 1, is the grieving process usually begins once the person is informed of the death. During this phase, the person experiences a vast array of emotions: anger, sadness, shock, disbelief, and so forth. The first phase of the grieving process can last for several weeks. So, Jonathan, to define that, the first phase is you're informed about what happened, and it's that shock reaction of not being able to put it into perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What's the second phase?
Second phase is after the initial reaction to the death, the numbness begins to wear off, and the person may feel that the pain of the loss is nearly unbearable.